A new Zelda game is on the way in less than 2 months' time. Now, Zelda is my favorite video game franchise of all time, and one where I've gotten every game at launch, or at least within a few days of it, since the release of Twilight Princess on the GameCube back in 2006. It is also one of the few series I'm willing to buy a new system for. In the case of Breath of the Wild, that will be the Nintendo Switch, since I sat out on the Wii U round, and looking at how things turned out for that system, that was probably for the best, considering that most of the games on it are worth anything, have either been, or in the process of being, ported to either the 3DS or the upcoming Switch. Now, as I anxiously await the next Zelda and the Nintendo Switch while playing through all the previous games, I figured it'd be fun to review all the Zelda games that came before and talk about my experiences with them over the next couple months. With 18 main games already, there's a lot to discuss. I'll also rank all of them from favorite to least favorite as Breath of the Wild's release draws near, and I might discuss a few other Zelda-related things, such as spin-offs, comics, and even the cartoon, though I make no promises about that one, though I would like to cover these. Now, I'll be doing this by release order where I can, but there are certain games that I'll be grouping together based on theme, system, and whatnot, not necessarily based on release order. And you'll probably see why later on. Now, without further ado, let's start talking about those games. It is always best to start from the beginning, the NES era in this case. Now, The Legend of Zelda, called the Hyrule Fantasy The Legend of Zelda in Japan, was released on the Famicom Disk System in February of 1986, and was released on the NES in July of 1987, with a European release coming along in November of the same year. Now, what is there to say about this game that hasn't already been said over the past 30 years? Well, not much. It is one of the most influential games of all time, spawning a series that has endured to us today, inspiring countless other games, and becoming a similar game, and becoming a standard for which similar games are compared to, such as a port of an NES port of one of the action RPG pioneers. It's very well designed, creating a truly open world with dungeons that can be completed in any order, with the exception of the last dungeon, because you need to complete all the other 8 first before you can go to the final one. This leads to countless possibilities to reach the end, perhaps the only true open world game in the series that currently exists, with only a few others coming close. Given that this was the first game in the series, it was also the introduction of famous video game characters such as Link, Princess Zelda, and Ganon, complete with an infamous mistranslation and misspelling that has since been corrected in future re-releases. Now, this is one of my earliest experiences with the Zelda series, being the second Zelda game I ever got. I got the Game Boy Advance port of a game many years ago while I enjoyed it from the start, it used to be a very challenging game for me. This is one of the games where I started many times before eventually figuring out how to beat it, and since then I've been able to play it on a regular basis. Yeah, after that I played it so much that it's now my top 5 favorite Zelda games. What used to take a very long time for me to beat is now a game I play when I have an hour or so to kill, and I enjoy every second of it. I've even found certain ways to make the overall experience a little better, or at least less of a chance of getting killed, making it a little easier and possibly faster, such as getting the white sword before I go into the first dungeon. Now, the original Zelda has been heralded as a classic and one of the best games ever made, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. This deserves all the accolades it has gotten, especially considering it's still being played when this game is 30 years old. The next game in the series, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, was released on the Famicom Disk System in January 1987 and was released in the rest of the world just a few months shy of 2 years later, arriving in Europe in November of 1988 and in the US a month later. Now, Zelda 2 is a drastically different game from the first Zelda. The game features a top-down view made famous by the first game, while you're on the overworld map at least, but most of the game takes place in side-scrolling screens, with that being the case in towns, dungeons, caves, and random encounters on the map. This game is also really, really hard. Adventure of Link is often called the black sheep of the Zelda series due to its differences from the rest of the games, and I've seen I've seen a lot of people calling this a bad game or quote unquote not a real Zelda game by many modern gamers. I have a few things to say about that. One, this is something that happened to a lot of games back in the NES days. I mean, while there were a number of sequels where a series that started on the NES where the third entry was basically went back to the style of the first game, a lot of developers seemed to like to experiment back then, so the second game's a lot of series ended up being drastically different from the first. Notable examples of this are Castlevania 2 and the North American Super Mario Bros. 2, both of which have suffered a similar fate to Zelda 2 when it comes to its reception in recent years. Though I can't fault anyone for disliking Castlevania 2 since it has numerous flaws, especially in the North American release. The Super Mario Bros. 2 is a different story since that is actually a really good game, which is not surprising since the game it was based on was designed by the Mario team, essentially. But that's a topic for another time. If you're judging Zelda 2 by standards of it not being like the other Zeldas, then why single just this one out? I find that both of the NES games are drastically different from what came afterwards, though elements from both help to set what would become standards for the rest of the series. And, considering that, let's be honest here, the series didn't resemble what we know until Link to the Past. Or at least that's when it started. Now, the side-scrolling element of Zelda 2 is something that's often brought up when discussing the differences between Adventure of Link and other Zelda games. But let's not forget that other Zelda games, such as the original and Link's Awakening, have some side-scrolling parts. Plus, numerous elements from Zelda 2 have become standards for the series, such as towns, which have literally been in every Zelda game since, with the exception of Four Swords. Now, that's probably the strangest Zelda game in my opinion, but I'll get into that another time. And using magic on a regular basis. Specifically, the magic meter, which would appear in many future console Zeldas, though it hasn't been seen since Wind Waker. Now, I must confess that I didn't always like Zelda 2. It was another early Zelda experience for me, getting this game for the Game Boy Advance not long after I got the first game. And I realized I really didn't like it back then, mainly because of its differences, but mainly because of how hard it was, and I thought there were some design flaws here and there. At least I thought that when I tried tackling it like I would a normal Zelda game. I still played it though, and somehow I got through it back then, though I still don't know how, at least back then. And I didn't think it was any good for many years, until a few years ago when I started getting into RPGs, specifically action RPGs like Ys, and got used to having to grind and level up your characters. I went back and started playing Adventure of Link like an RPG, and found it to be much better. Not only did I find the game easier now that I was spending more time leveling, I also found it to be a really good game and lots of fun, eventually becoming one of my favorite games in the series, and one that I look forward to playing every year. Funny how the Zelda series is often referred to as an RPG series, when it really is not. And Zelda 2, the only game in the Zelda series that actually is an RPG, or could at least qualify as one, is the one that's often treated as an outsider. Now, the last thing I'll say is this. If you really dislike this game, give it another chance like I did. If you tackle it as an RPG and not as a regular Zelda game, you might have a more enjoyable time with it. Because Adventure of Link is a truly wonderful game. Well, that's the end of my review and history of NES Zelda games, both of which are a lot of fun to me and are important games in the history of video games. Now, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter to get the latest updates on videos and other projects. Now, tune in next week as I discuss the next two Zelda games, A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening.